Oh my goodness, this is one of the best short stories I've ever read in my life. Hi guys, welcome back to Too Cool for Middle School. Today I'm going to be walking you through one of the units in the Collections English curriculum from HMH, what is it, like Houghton Mifflin something? Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. I've got the pacing guide for teachers right here, but in a lot of my other videos and like Insta stories, you guys have noticed that we're using the Collections curriculum, and a lot of you seem to be using it as well. But it's new to all of us, so I'm just going to start making videos about the units that we do and the stories that we like, maybe the stories we didn't love as much, and just how I'm teaching it, just to give you some ideas. I want to thank Storyblocks for sponsoring this video. I don't get to say that about many videos, so it's kind of exciting. Storyblocks used to be known as Graphic Stock, and I worked with them once before, just while I was going through a process of trying to raise the quality of the images on my channel and on my blog and on Instagram and within my classroom and on Google Classroom, even with Teachers Pay Teachers stuff. So if you are somebody that uses any of those platforms, you know, first, like, my advice would always just be like, get started, do whatever you can with whatever you can. But once you kind of get your footing, it's nice to be able to use a little bit higher quality images. So what Storyblocks does is they have 400,000 images on their website, and you have access to all of those images and you can use them in anything you do. So the good thing is, if you do like Teachers Pay Teachers, you can use that image and put it on products that you sell in your Teachers Pay Teachers store. Sometimes you have to be kind of careful with like the copyright of imaging and stuff, but with Storyblocks, it's royalty-free images. I make a lot of posters that I never print, but that I just put on Google Classroom for my students, like when we had our Hanukkah celebration coming up, or like our Secret Santa party. Then I can find really high quality images from them to use in those type of situations. And then also on my blog and on my YouTube channel, their images are really good for like thumbnail pictures if you make YouTube videos. And it's a subscription service, but there's a link below where you can get 7 days for free to try it out and download as much as you want, and just see if that's something that would help you either on TPT or YouTube or in your classroom or your blog or whatever. My husband like wishes that he was a jingle writer. He's constantly making up songs, so I was telling him about it and he wrote a little jingle. How does it go? You're not finished till you find... Oh, okay. It goes, you're not finished till you find your image at Storyblocks. That's pretty good. That's nice. That's pretty good. Okay, so anyway, getting into this curriculum, the pacing guide I have found to be really useful. So my team and I are pretty lucky that we've had time to plan together, and we usually just bring our pacing guides and then our Chromebooks, and we look up all of like the readings and everything on our Chromebooks, but then all of our notes and everything we write down in our pacing guides. So this curriculum is online. It takes a little bit of time to get used to the format. I'm still not totally used to the format, and I know that there are a lot of things that I'm not taking advantage of because it's just like not where I go. Like, I know one of my coworkers uses the FYI section a lot, and that has a lot of informational text and articles that go along with the units, and she really likes that. I just always forget to go there. I tend to go to like Newsella or something and then just like find outside resources, and I always forget that those are there. Another one of my coworkers found the end of unit assessments, and then there are even assessments at the end of each story. So I finally started using those, but it's just like with each unit that we do, we kind of figure out more things, and you just have to be in communication with other people that are teaching it, because not everything is just laid out in front of you, since so much of it is online. Like, you have to like know what you're looking for. So that's why I wanted to make a couple of these videos, just to help you guys out and like talk through it as we do it. So I teach 6th grade English and 8th grade English. I'll make an 8th grade video later. But okay, we did not start with the first unit. So the first, or collection, they're called collections. First collection is Facing Fear. We didn't go very far into it, but we thought it was a little bit boring. And then collection 2 was Animal Intelligence, and to me that didn't sound all that interesting either. But collection 3 is Dealing with Disaster. And when this school year started, there were multiple hurricanes and fires and flooding and all kinds of natural disasters going on. So we thought it would be best to just switch over to dealing with disaster and start with this so that it would be more relevant to our students. The suggested pacing on this is 33 days. That's probably pretty accurate. We did not do every single thing in here, and we just don't. So I think it's not meant to be used in that way. I don't think you have to use everything. You can make some choices and do the stories that you really like and then skip a few if you want to, fill in if you know of other things that you want to use. You don't have to follow everything the exact way that it's laid out, but then that also makes it a little bit stressful because then you really have to know what's in here and plan ahead. And that is very difficult to do when you have 3 brand new preps and brand new sets of curriculum that you've never seen before. So it's been kind of hard for me. Okay, so this is what the pacing guide looks like for this unit. So it only tells me like the texts that are included. These are selection lessons, interactive lessons, and then assessments. Okay, and then they're even split up. So actually, if you like ignore these 3, these are selection lessons. They are divided up into short, medium, and long texts. So we started with the anchor text. Sometimes there's 1 anchor text, sometimes there's 2, and they say definitely do the anchor text. So this one was called Mammoth Shakes and Monster Waves, and it was about a tsunami that hit in Indonesia. I forget the year, but it was when I was in college. It was like 2004, 2005. So you might remember that. It was a really destructive tsunami. And at the beginning of this text, they really get into the science of tsunamis and like the seafloor. So if you can possibly kind of overlap this unit with the science classes at all, that really helps their understanding. So we talked to the science department at the beginning of the year and said, if you guys could possibly, start covering things about like hurricanes and tsunami and weather during the first part of the year, that would be great for us. And they have new curriculum this year too, so they're just kind of testing everything out. So they were like, that's fine, especially since all of this is going on in the news. So we collaborated in that way so that our students had the scientific knowledge coming from their science classes, and then we could read about it and get more deep into texts in English. So that was really nice that they worked with us in that way. I feel like I've been talking for a long time already. And then you know what they had to do in science is they had to make structures that could survive tsunamis, and so they put those structures in little kiddie pools with water, and then the science teachers took leaf blowers and blew water all over them and tried to see who could withstand that. So if you also teach science, something like that could be pretty fun. The kids loved it. All of us knew the day they were doing it because that leaf blower was real loud outside our doors. Okay, so anyway, that Mammoth Shakes and Monster Waves, it's really long, and this actually says it could take 5 days to do, and I could see that, especially if they didn't get the science side in their science classes. And then one thing that I brought in with this was we watched a clip from the movie, never remember the name of this movie because it's not a good name. The Impossible, is that what it's called? Yeah, The Impossible, with Naomi Watts and Ewan McGregor and Tom Holland. So this movie was about that tsunami and a real life family that lived through it. One of the things that was a little bit starkly obvious though in watching that movie after we read about it is that the text really talks about the local people who lived there and all of the aftermath that they had to deal with. Although there were a lot of tourists on Christmas break that were affected, but then we were the whole movie is about this white family from England, I believe, and we were I feel like it kind of left out some of the local stories, and the kids brought that up, not me. So that was interesting that they recognized that after we had done reading about it first. But then this movie does do a really good job of portraying the tsunami. I don't know how they did all that with special effects, but it's really, really good. I would definitely suggest showing either the trailer for that movie or just the clip where the tsunami hits. The other interesting thing about this text is that it talks about these cultures who had stories to explain a lot of the natural disasters that are common occurrences in that area. And they're these myths that explain scientific phenomena. And if you actually listen to these myths, it actually does shed light on what happened there. Even if they weren't able to explain it scientifically, the stories actually bring with them a lot of information. So we talked about oral tradition and myths, and so I had my students actually write their own geomyths, and the myth had to explain extreme weather in some way. So it could have been a tsunami or a hurricane or a blizzard or an avalanche or something, but it had to explain it in like a mythical form with like gods and stuff like that. So that was a really cool like first writing project at the beginning of the year. It's kind of creative, kind of fun, and then it gave me some insight into their writing skills and their understanding of like the assignment and just following directions and their understanding of the text. So that anchor text is really good. Then we also did a short story, which is The Banana Tree. And this was about a kid in the Caribbean, and I love talking about the Caribbean. So that was really fun for me. And his family knew that a hurricane was going to hit, and so they were hiding, but he had planted this banana tree, and that was going to provide money for him, and he wanted to run back and save that tree. And this was so interesting because this is when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico and Florida, and so we were watching these things unfold on the news, and then we were reading about it happening as well. So it was very powerful, and it was a way to get the kids to connect to current events and pay attention to what was happening and have kind of some language to talk about it. I like the use of dialect in The Banana Tree, and to be honest, this year everything is just like an overview, and I'm just kind of seeing how the kids react to everything, so we didn't go all that deep into the story this year, but next year we will for sure. So those are the long texts, and then there's one called A Night to Remember, and this is history writing, and I don't know how I skipped that one, but I guess I did. For some reason we didn't do that one. So I'll have to try it out next year, but that's how it's been going through this brand new curriculum. We couldn't hit everything. So those were all the long texts. The medium texts included a documentary called Titanic at 100 Mystery Solved. That was something I remember I assigned on Google Classroom that they could do on their own through their Chromebooks while I was out at a training. I think I was at a training for this curriculum, and so I never actually watched it, so I don't really remember how that went, but I will get back to you on that one next year. Okay, now the two poems were absolutely fantastic. I absolutely loved them. My favorite was After the Hurricane by Rita Williams Garcia. It's got a lot in it, and weirdly what I had to do, because it's in the book but you can't write in the book, and then it's on their Chromebooks, but it's a little bit, you know, you can annotate and take notes and highlight and stuff on the Chromebook, but I just really wanted them to like interact with this on paper. So I actually printed that poem out for all my students so that they could underline and highlight and write notes directly on the page. And so what we did was we read through this story a couple of times, and we looked for what people need after a hurricane. Hurricanes had just hit in Houston when we were reading this poem. And this poem is set right after New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath and what people need after a hurricane. And so we went through and underlined everything that we could find that showed what people needed. And you had to do a lot of inference in order to figure that out. So for example, like if toilets flushed, so we would underline that and make a little note and say plumbing, people need plumbing and sewers. If babies slept, and so they would kind of brainstorm off that, like, why aren't the babies sleeping? Okay, they need cribs, probably, they need food, they need diapers. We would think of all the reasons why the babies weren't sleeping. If faucets ran, okay, so they need water. Again, they need plumbing. Old bodies didn't die in the sun if none of it were real. And we thought about how old people are especially vulnerable in a disaster. Like, what if they don't have family? How are they gonna get out? They're not very mobile. How are they going to evacuate? So it took us a really long time to get through this poem because we really like discussed every word. And we went through the poem that way, and there are some kids in the poem who are looking for a water truck. And these kids are like the band geeks. And so it helped that a lot of my kids are also band geeks because they understood some of like the references. If your kids aren't, they might need a little bit of help in that area just in order for it to really come alive to them and make sense to them. But this is one of the best poems that I've read. This one was great, and the kids really connected to it. And then what we did after that is we made a list of all the things that people need after hurricanes. And then we went and found organizations that were helping in Houston or in Puerto Rico or in the Virgin Islands, and they had to do a report on why you should donate money to this particular organization. So my example was, there is this organization that gives clean underwear to people who are in natural disaster situations. I think it's called Underwear for All, and I donated to them. And so I did a sample presentation just explaining how people need to retain their dignity while they're trying to solve their issues and find their loved ones and figure out when they're going to get to go home. And having clean underwear is just a basic need that we need to meet for them. So then they spent a few days researching other organizations, and some kids noticed that the line, where it says if babies slept, and they found organizations that donate diapers and baby formula and things like that. And so then they all got up and did a presentation on Google Slides, and I have, requirements for how they do their slides and how they do presentations and stuff like that. But that was a really cool thing to do, because they were actually able to look into real life organizations that help people after hurricanes or other natural disasters. One of my colleagues, instead of doing that, is she had her kids research what kind of emergency supplies they should have at home always ready, and then write an informational article on what you should have at all times in your emergency kit. So those are a couple different options for projects that you can do, not necessarily at the end of this unit, but just within it. The other poem is called Watcher, and to be honest, it's just escaping me right now. I can't remember what that one was about, but after the hurricane definitely will stay with me forever. So then there are 3 just short options for text, and all 3 of those are in the close reader. Okay, and another one of my colleagues has a really great tip for using the close reader. See, this has been so nice that we've all been sharing our information. Now you get the wealth of knowledge from all 4 of us that teach 6th grade English at my school. So what she noticed with the close reader is that all of the odd number questions ask them to underline or circle or write a note in the margin, and they're all interacting with the text. So she has them go through the first time and just do the odds, and then the second time through, the next day, she has them go through and do all the evens, because those are comprehension questions. So they answer the questions on the second read through, and then the final question at the end is always a little bit longer, and the only way to really answer that last final question is if you did everything else. So then she only grades that last question. I mean, she doesn't tell them that, of course, but that's all she really gives them credit for. But by that point, they've really interacted with the text. And then I copied her idea, and what I even did is I had them write it out there and then type it up on an assignment on Google Classroom. So then I didn't have to bother flipping through every single close reader. I just read all of them on Google Classroom and just went through and graded all of them that way. So you've got to find what works for you. One of the things with this curriculum is that so much of it is online, and it's really hard to keep up on grading all of it and being able to see everything. Some stuff you can't even ever see their scores, and then flipping through all of their close readers would just be impossible. So you've just got to kind of figure out what works for you. Okay, so we did that with this article called On the Titanic, Defined by What They Wore, and I actually thought that was such an interesting article. And we watched a preview for Titanic, and I told them about my love for Titanic. So I was in 6th grade when that movie came out, so we did 2 days about Titanic. One of the other ones is Moby Duck, which is really funny to me, but it went way over the 6th graders' heads, and it's a ton of illusion, and I enjoyed it, but they didn't really, so I would maybe cut that one out next time, spend more time on the Titanic, and then this is the final one, and I loved this. There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury. Oh my goodness, this is one of the best short stories I've ever read in my life. And Ray Bradbury was so prolific. I feel like I've read a lot of his stories, but there are always a ton that I haven't read, and this one was new to me. Okay, so this story is about there has been a nuclear holocaust and all of the people are dead, but their house still lives on. I think this was written in 1952, which is mind-blowing. So their house pretty much has an Alexa or an Amazon Echo or whatever, So in the morning, their house says good morning, and tells them what the weather is, and this is the bill that you have due today, and this is the date, and it makes breakfast for them, and the house doesn't realize that everyone is dead. So the house continues to function. They even have a Roomba, so the dog dies on the floor, and the Roomba like detects it and comes out and like cleans it up and takes it away and brings it down to an incinerator. So the house like completely functions after the people are gone, and it is so timely. It's so weird. Everything in their house like we pretty much have now. Oh, like in the baby's room there is like this wall that has like different landscapes on it, and it can change. Like I could totally see that being a thing. And it's like on the wall at that time, it's like African animals like skipping across the plains, and people are always trying to go, you know, like back to like early man and like live that way. And so I could totally see how some blog article came out about how babies in the Sahara were the most healthy, and so we should go back to that. Like it's crazy. Like you can just get so into this story. Some of them totally get it. Some of them have a little bit harder time. So we did a lot with this story just to make sure that everybody understood it, because some of the kids at the end of this story, they were like, that is the creepiest story I've ever read. And some of them were like, huh, what just happened? So one thing that I did was it explains how there's a white wall and then just like ash against the wall in a silhouette of the family. It's like a mom, a dad, and two kids like throwing a ball. So I had my kids physically make that silhouette with their own bodies just so we could see what that would look like. That's definitely something you could do. And we had this discussion about like in a natural disaster, like who's the first to go? There's the humans. And the second to go would be like the animals, the dogs. And then like even our technology outlives us, but nature always wins. Like nature takes back over. That story, that I can't wait to read it again. It was so crazy. That will stick with me forever. And there's a ton of personification in that story. So another thing that we did was went through and pulled out many examples of personification. There's a fire. A fire burns down the house. Eventually, like nature just takes over and like destroys everything that humans built. And there's some, the examples of personification are just incredible. So I pulled out like 10 examples and gave each group a quote, and then they had to write an explanation, like what does this personify, how does it personify it, and what effect does it have on the story. And then each of those groups had to do a presentation in front of the class, just a short one, just explaining the personification. And then like the next day I had them write a paragraph, a literary analysis paragraph explaining the personification in Ray Bradbury's There Will Come Soft Rains, and they were able to choose 2 examples of personification. They could choose the one that they studied and another one, or 2 that were different from what they had studied. And so they had already heard the entire class talking about personification. They could even take someone's example and the example that their group had used, as long as they could write it in a literary analysis paragraph or essay. So that was a good like early writing assignment too. And then something we didn't even really get into is the poem within the story and the illusion of that poem. And the poem is called There Will Come Soft Rains. And so like the house recites a poem to the members of the house every day, like before they go to bed at a certain time. And the poem really reflects everything that's happening in the story. So this says one day for There Will Come Soft Rains, but I would spend like a week at least on There Will Come Soft Rains. This was amazing. Okay, and then to be honest, I didn't do any of the interactive lessons. I still haven't gotten into that. I really didn't do any of the assessments. Now I know how to find those, but I didn't when I did these. I didn't do the I did do the performance task. I don't know, I can't remember, but there is a performance task that aligns with this. Sometimes they don't align though. Like the 8th grade one, the first unit does not align with the first performance task. So you have to be a little bit careful when you're checking those out. So, and then one more thing I have to mention. This ended up not working out great, but it was such a cool idea. And if you could do this, or something like this, you should really try. I wanted to set up a Google Hangout with Miss Tierney's class because they live in Houston, and I wanted my kids to interview them. So my kids came up with interview questions, and we were gonna do like a video Google Hangout with her classroom. We got so excited, and then on the day of the Hangout, we realized that Miss Tierney's district blocks any email addresses from outside of the district, and so it wouldn't let us do the Hangout. It took us a long time to get to that point and figure that out. So our kids were really disappointed, but we just did like FaceTime from our phones, and my kids just like asked her questions and then they answered them. And actually where they were, the hurricane hadn't hit quite as hard as like what we were seeing on the news and stuff. So that was kind of interesting for our kids to hear, that not everything we were seeing on the news reflected everything that everyone was going through. But anyway, it was really interesting. So bringing in like real life sources is also something I always suggest. And I will be making a video on how to do a mystery hangout with another classroom. I'll make it during Christmas break. I'll put it up very soon. Those are amazing. So anyway, okay, so collection 3 from the 6th grade Collections Curriculum, Dealing with Disaster. My favorite things, I really did like the anchor text, Mammoth Shakes and Monster Waves. Thought that was really good. I absolutely loved the After the Hurricane poem. I thought that was so powerful. And then There Will Come Soft Rains blew my mind with how good that was. And the Titanic defined by what they wore, that was super, super interesting as well. I would definitely not skip that one because it just reveals so much about class and how we treat people even in a disaster based on their class or social status. And you could get into Katrina to show that as well. So there's just so much that you can do with this. As far as I can tell so far, this is my favorite collection in this book. I think it's really, really good. So I'm glad we started here. I will be doing more of them as we continue to work through this curriculum. Let me know if you are also using the collections curriculum and if you've done unit 3 or collection 3 and what else you did with it, because it would be so interesting just to hear from teachers all over what kind of things you're doing with the same texts. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this very long video. I hope that it was helpful for you and could replace like a day of PD. That's always my goal. So have a great rest of your day and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.